reduce a lot of plants. So what we wanted to do in 2017 was to maintain and survey the sites from 2016, push through those quickly, and move to the other sites that are on the site list. We were able to do that and actually double the amount of sites, including the ones that we worked on in 2016. We had multiple harvests in the original 11 sites for 2016, and I think we had 24 sites that we hit in 2017. So what we wanted to do was continue a reduction in the density of the dense sites in Lake George and reduce them to moderate or scattered. What we did was came back to the sites in 2016 and were able to reduce the numbers and levels of Eurasian milfoil in these sites to maintenance phase levels. When I say that, I mean crews are able to quickly and cover a large amount of area, and then we were able to move to other sites of the lake. In 2017, reduction time decreased enough to where we could shift focus to the other. What we wanted to do also was continue with our multiple inspections and harvests of these sites throughout the season. Usually we wanted to be about 2 weeks between harvests. That way we can counteract the new growth that's there and inspect the other areas around the sites just in case there's a satellite patch or other plants that happen to grow. We wanted to also create a model for management on Lake George. As of last year, before Sunset Bay, there were over 660 benthic barriers in the lake. In Sunset Bay, there were 177, I believe, and we pulled those at the end of the year. What we wanted to do in Sunset was show that a comprehensive plan towards eliminating large, dense areas is feasible. So in 2002 to 2013, I believe, there were 177 panels that were placed in Sunset Bay. We came in, we harvested the plants around and on top of the mats themselves because a lot of the sediment that happens in Sunset actually grew plants on top of the mats. It's pretty interesting. So we harvested them, came back at the end of the season and pulled all 177 mats out. So as of right now, Sunset Bay is actually a clean area, but it needs attention because now that everything is out of there, there's nothing to take its place. We want the native species to take its place. So attention is going to be needed there. This may be hard to see for everybody, but this is a harvest, a site harvest in pounds. And at the top is Harris Bay. There's roughly 15,000 pounds that we pulled out of Harris Bay. It was one of the original sites that we wanted to keep an eye on in 2016, and we ended up finding that there's, due to increased boat traffic and high fragmentation, fertility in this part of the lake, we found an increase in growth from last year. But I think it can be managed quite well if we can just stay on top of it, use a little bit more manpower and time in there, and decrease the amount of time between harvests. I think we can keep that to a minimum. Glen Burnie and Blair's Bay, for some reason, we were finding new plants growing very quickly in this area, and it was moving across the bay where we weren't finding it before, but it seemed to be moving along with the sedimentation that's there. There's a quick turnaround in Glen Burnie for new growth, and it may act as a feeder bed for other areas of the lake. If there's wind action or wave action, it might cause fragmentation, and these fragments may move to different parts of the lake. So we want to keep an eye on that for sure. As we move down the list, I know it's difficult to see, about a quarter of the way down is Gull Bay. This is a good candidate for mat removal because there are roughly 61 mats in Gull, I believe. We harvested Gull pretty well. We moved from, I believe it was 400 bags last year to about 100 bags this year. And if we can use what we did in Sunset, we can apply that to Gull Bay and remove more of these mats out of the lake. Moving down, the bay southwest of Cannon Point, this is another high growth, highly potential area for infestation. We came in a little late in the season to hit that, but our crews initially pulled out quite a few bags, but I believe there's some maintenance to be done in there. I swam that not too long, I think last year. I remember seeing it. It was infested. It was a monoculture. Came back this year, surveyed it. It was knocked back a little bit. Then the crews went back in and hit it. A little more extra maintenance in there. I think we'll be in good shape. Moving down, about 2/3 of the way down is Dunham's Bay. In Dunham's Bay, that was one of the biggest areas that we were covering since 2009. And we've reduced Dunham's to roughly about 200 bags, or 200 pounds. And that's literally nothing when it comes to the size of that bay. Maintenance phase in that bay is very quick. We can move through it fast and then get out of there and move to other places. The next slide I have here is diver hours versus bags harvested. I want to just note a trend. Diver hours is in blue and bag totals is in orange. As diver hours increase, we should see bags decrease. Having more people in the water, having more people harvesting, I think we should be able to see a decrease in bags harvested. In 2012, this is where we kind of didn't get the harvest that we wanted to get. Our diver hours are very low, and as you can see, the bags that we were picking are more than the diver hours because we're seeing a lot more milfoil growing. And then the next few years after that, 2014, 2015, we start to see a level off of bags and diver hours, and what we want to see is diver hours above the bags that we are picking. That way we know we're ahead of the game and we're decreasing the levels of milfoil. So what we want to see is we want to see at least a 20 to 25% more diver hours in the lake, and that will result in less bags and pounds being picked in. The next one is a site comparison from 2016 to 2017. These were the original 11 sites that we hit, the densest areas that we hit. Out of the 11 sites that we harvested in 2016, 8 of these sites were reduced by a minimum of 25%. So what we are seeing is some where it changed as high as 77%, 81%. This is great from the year before. The one thing I would like to say, Glen Burnie, site 117, I mentioned it before. For some reason it's very fertile. For some reason the growth rate in this bay is very quick. And we're seeing the spread across, making it a little bit more difficult to manage, taking more time away from other places we'd like to be. So I don't want to put that one in to say we're going to reclassify it from a dense site to a moderate site, because there's still a lot of work to be done in there, and it's one of the bigger feeder areas that I think would push fragments to other parts of the lake. Harris Bay, this is another lake, or another bay itself, where it's highly fertile, a lot of boat traffic, a lot of fragmentation, and this could also cause a seeding of new beds. What I believe and what I possibly witnessed was fragments moving from that part of the lake out and possibly seeding near Long Island. I was out there one day, it was kind of a heavy wind coming out of the east, and I was just kind of motoring around and I saw a fragment trail, so I decided to follow it, and it led right into those bays coming out, and right there in front of me in about 12 to 15 feet of water was a large bed of oil. This was at the end of the season. I instructed the crews to go over there, hit this pretty hard. They pulled about 100 bags out of that one site by itself. So that way you can actually see the fragments moving from one spot to another, and without management in these areas, they will grow to dense sites. These are pretty fertile. Some of the things here, the village, we have not been in the village. This is a high priority site. Problem is, there's a lot of boat traffic. It's a little dangerous to throw divers in the water with big boats coming in and out. The village docks are there, so it's public use. You're in close and tight to everything, so it's quite difficult to manage this area successfully and not be tied up with stopping work for things that are happening around. So we're trying to figure out a strategy for the site, the best way to do it. It could be we get in there on off days of weather. We could get in there on weekdays that are just cold and not many people are out. But it's still an area that we want to keep an eye on and really get in there and try to manage. Hopefully in 2018, we can get in there and do a little bit more work. There wasn't any done in 2017, 2016. There was minimal effort. I think 21 bags were pulled out, but that's a drop in the bucket for what needs to be done. This right here is a comparison of bag totals for each of the sites that we hit. The red numbers are an increase from the previous year, and the green numbers are a decrease from the previous year. In 2015, you could see there's a lot of red, so there was a lot of increase. This is where efforts kind of fell off, and Eurasian milfoil levels were able to pick back up and repopulate areas that were harvested before. So 2015, we show a lot of red because we were picking a lot of plants, increased numbers in these areas. 2016, we see more green come up, but we haven't hit some of the spots that we hit in 2015. In 2017, we see a lot more green because we see a lot of reduction from the harvest areas in 2016. Some of the asterisks that are there denotes a limited time harvesting. Lake George Village for one, and the other one is Finkelbrook. That is a very fertile area. We always seem to find a lot of plants there. So we didn't have a lot of time to pick, but when we did, we definitely picked quite a few bags. So what we want to see was we want to see a trend of more green, less red from year to year. So from 2016 to 2017, I'd like to reclassify some of the areas that we've had. So of the 11 high priority sites, 7 I would consider would be moderate to scattered. It's very important that we go through and monitor these areas and not lag in terms of time between harvests. So we want to be able to be in there, move quickly through it, pick whatever's there, and move out. So these sites, the highest one that we saw was 81.5% reduction in milfoil at Elizabeth Island. So that's very good, very promising. Northwest Bay also, the 77.7% looks very good from what we picked in 2016. I know that Northwest Bay is very fertile. It's one of the largest bays on Lake George, and it can also be a feeder area for other sites for Eurasian milfoil. So one of the asterisks is in T Island, North T Island Bay. We had a dramatic drop of 76.9% in Eurasian, but the dominant species there that we found was curly leaf pondweed. So as we were looking for Eurasian, we found a large bed of curly leaf. Our crews picked that and pulled about 100 bags out, which is about 2,500 pounds. The second asterisk down is Sunset Bay. 76.6% reduction. But as of now, since the mats are out, it's clear, it's the end of the season, the growing season has stopped. Next year will be important to get in there rather quickly, assess it, and make sure that new growth does not establish itself and it is picked before it can overrun the rest of that area. So this is a very good candidate for a success story on Lake George in terms of proper Eurasian milfoil management. Obviously, with a 50.3% reduction in Glen Burnie, I still wouldn't consider it a reclassification. I would still consider it a high priority just because of its high growth. So some of these in areas of concern that we found for 2018, we have not hit Basin Bay in 2016. We hit it in 2017, and there was an increase in bag count from our initial harvest in 2015 from 12.5 bags to 99 bags in 2017. And these were only 2 sites that we hit. There's more areas in this bay that need to be surveyed, and we think that this could be one of the bays that needs extra attention for 2018. The shoal and the littoral zone out there is pretty extensive. The shoal actually probably collects more fragments and establishes more plants that way than it does growing from old plants. So this area, I believe, could use a little bit more attention. Obviously, Glen Burnie is the second one. I believe this is a high priority site. We want to keep an eye on it. We don't want to let it get out of control. The red that you can see stretching across the bay is actually the plants that we found, and a couple of years back, we only found plants around the first top third of that area. So in 2 years, the plants spread right across that bay and will continue to spread. And actually, this year we found a satellite patch to the south. It's a little bit difficult to see, but there's a larger patch that we found coming off the southern tip of that, and we put quite a few bags out of that. So this is an area we definitely want to keep an eye on in the future. Third one, the village. Obviously, we deal with a lot of variables in there. We would like to have a strategy, but it's difficult to implement it in this spot. There's just way too many things going on for the village. That being said, it's not impossible to manage this area. It's just it's going to take a little bit of strategy to do it. Next one, Rogers Rock. We've hit Rogers Rock pretty hard, and in 2015, 24 bags were removed, about 600 pounds, and in 2016, no effort was made just because of time constraints, but in 2017, 26 bags were removed. I remember going in there and seeing a long band near the mooring buoys. This is important, an important area because it's seen by the public, so you're getting a lot of activity around these mooring buoys, and if they're bringing boats in, tying them up, you're increasing fragmentation in this area, and what we want to do is we want to get the bulk of that down, keep it down, so that A, the public isn't spreading it with their boats, and B, they're not impacted negatively through aesthetics or swimming or anything like that. We want to keep this area free and clear for the public use. So we believe this site should be maintained in 2008. Harris Bay, this site surprised me. We did find nearly double the amount of milfoil that was picked. So there was also a satellite patch that was witnessed. We picked that as well. But the middle part of this bay seems to be very fertile. We've come back year to year and picked multiple bags out of here. So it's important that we limit the amount of time between harvests in this area and be vigilant. We'd like to double up crews in this area just to cover a lot more ground and get out of there quicker. But it's consistently produced high amounts of Eurasian milfoil, especially near the center. Also, it's a bay that has a lot of boat traffic. You're going to see fragmentation from boats. and a lot of these fragments are gonna move out of the bay and colonize other places. So this is someplace we wanna really keep an eye on for 2008. So this is a picture of our guys picking mats out of Sunset Bay. And we think that towards the end of the season, it would be a good idea to start moving towards getting this stuff out of the lake. Like I said, there's about 660 mats still there, still in the lake, and countless and unknown amounts of rebar, cement, anything that's going to weigh down these mats. We're not quite sure where it all is. So what we want to do is, as we're surveying these areas and harvesting, we want to have a better understanding of where all these mats are. And then at the end of the season, when the growing season ends, we can come in for 1 or 2 weeks and start removing this mass of trash out of the lake. 660 mats, it's going to take probably about 7 weeks to do it, depending on where they are, how they're impacted by sediment, and how much rebar or weight that's on. But it's a very good idea to start getting this stuff out. They're starting to break up. We've noticed that they're weather-eaten, and the more they stay in the lake, the more they're just going to start to just break apart and become microscopic plastic pieces that are floating around. So we want to really get these out before they get out. Plus they're trash. Just want to get them out. Sunset Bay is where we were working to get these mats. In 2002, 2013, estimated 177 barriers were placed. In 2014, we had a harvest of 44 bags, about 1,100 pounds. 2015, 261 bags. 2016, 428, and a big reduction in 2017 with 100 bags. So that was about 2,500 pounds we removed of Eurasian milfoil for 2017. At the end of October, I think the second week of October, we spent 1 week there removing all the mats, including all the rebar that was placed on top of them. Did a swim over and could not find anything left in the bay. The site was cleared and is now a model for the success of Eurasian milfoil management, but it is strongly recommended that we go back there to make sure that no new regrowth establishes itself over a short period of time. So we want to keep on top of Sunset for sure. Shell Bay is actually next on our list. We'd like to get in there, start pulling these mats out. We had an extensive harvest there in 2016 and 2017. It was classified a dense bed. I would classify it as a moderate site now. The benthic barriers that are there now has suppressed the growth, but plants did thrive around the perimeter. They were observed on top of the mats, so we want to get these mats out just like we did in Sunset, clean it up, and move this to another success story for the Eurasian milfoil management. So it's a good candidate for benthic area removal in 2008. A lot of words here, but basically what we wanted to do was have a best approach to Lake George and what to do. So I think we had a successful 2 years implemented since 2016. We wanted to reduce the heavy areas in the bigger sites that we know of. That way we can move to it quickly, and get to the other sites that are on the site inventory. There's roughly about 205, 207 sites on the lake. Many of them have been cleared and remain clear of milfoil to this day, but they haven't been checked. So we want to get out there and look at these sites, make sure that they're okay. That way we can check them off the list again and move to the sites that have growth in. So our main concern is to eliminate dense beds, move those down to moderate, start looking at the scattered areas, and move towards getting a lot of the trash that's out there. And I can give this to the board if they need to make copies. But there's a lot of stuff in here that I just wanted to show that it did prove successful. Moving from 2016 to 17, I think that Our strategy for 2018 will follow, it'll actually mirror 2017. We're going to move through the heavier sites quickly, move to the sites that we've been to in 2017, and then go through more sites in 2018 for throughout the site inventory. So we'd like to be able to start knocking this out.
My presentation.
If anyone has any questions, I can answer them right now.
One quick one. How deep will milfoil grow?
Lake George, we've actually seen it around 19 feet. So, because it's so clear, and if you have good substrate, it'll grow pretty deep in Lake George. Other lakes, not so much. It's turbid, or water clarity isn't that well. We'll see it roughly around 70 feet. That's about the idea.
You know, there's talk that has an effect on it, but I have yet to see a year where it correlated with, if we had a good freeze, the milfoil goes down. I've seen years where you wouldn't believe it would be a good year. Limited sunlight, cold weather, but the next year it exploded. So
So there's something that's unknown that's causing this plant.
there's a lot of factors involved with it. It's just you can't pinpoint it on one. It's almost a correlation of all of them that come together. Some might be helping it more than others. Some might be limiting. We're not sure.
And, you mentioned boat traffic, but is there also, an association with, the bacterial level in the lake? And you talked about the village dog office, chloride in the water, and I don't know if the same is true for prayers.
I think any nutrient loading is going to increase urination
So
milfoil
you need
growth.
more help than just people going out and laps.
I believe we need more people going out and doing more.
Of that,
Right.
yes, but you need other things to get in line to help you guys.
In the village especially.
Using foods and
I think that it definitely contributes to it. I don't think it's the sole factor for it, but any nutrient that's introduced into the lake, I believe, is going to increase any sort of growth.
And last question. When you odor notices in package or whatever, you see some, is there some, I mean, maybe I'm just ignorant to this, can they, is there anything they can do or call or?
I would say contact any one of the three agencies, Lake George Park Commission, the Lake George Association, or the Fund for Lake George, and they will relay that message. I've gotten an email saying, hey, go check out over here, send crews out, sure enough, pick the patch. So, and then we'll GPS that site and come back and monitor it later on. For sure.
We actually, anytime we go into the association, talks about check it out and make sure that from a year, there's traffic on top.
Great, thank you.
We'd like to work on a rapid response. That way, if crews near a site that has been noticed to have increased milfoil, we'd like to get there quickly, take care of that, and then resume our operation.
Okay, thanks, Tommy, appreciate it. That'd be great, absolutely. Yeah, thanks. What's that? Yeah, just email me, that'll be great. Sure. So just to highlight a little bit about the overview on milfoil in Lake George, the LGA has put in $100,000 this year of their own private donated money, which is great. So I think we're really making some progress out there. Our numbers are down a little bit this year, 260,000 overall. The previous year was 460. So we actually, Walt and I have a meeting today at 1 o'clock to talk about some Department of State grants that'll help out. So we're hoping for, certainly as much money as we had this year for next year, hopefully a little bit more. But I think we're making some good progress out there, so stay tuned. So thanks again, Tommy.
Thank you, Dave. Project Review Action Report. Joe? There you go. Project Review Action Report 2017-64. Whereas the Commission has received and reviewed the Project Review Actions Report prepared by the staff and dated November 7, 2017. Whereas the Project Review Actions Committee recommends acceptance of the Project Review Actions Report, now therefore be resolved that the Commission directs that the Project Review Actions Report be incorporated in the minutes of the full Commission meeting. So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to accept the Project Review Action Report. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. First application on the agenda is the turboat application submitted by Joseph Greco, Joe's Fishing Charters, Town of Hague.
Correct. So this is an application for variance for operation of a tour boat. The operation actually consists of 2 vessels, one to be berthed at the operator's dock in the Town of Hague, where passengers will be picked up and discharged at the Hague Steamer Dock. So variance is required there because it's not operating from the Class A marina. And the second boat will be operated in the village at a Lake Crest Motel, which is currently authorized as a marina for tour boat operation. And I believe Mr. Greco is here to represent the application. Just ask you to approach the microphone and discuss.
Be glad to answer any questions you may have. Requesting a permit to allow me to continue operating my charter fishing operation. I've been in business for 26 years, operating out of the Town of Hague, and I'm looking for a variance with the new stipulations relative to tour boat permits. I have a letter from the Town of Hague, which I think you have a copy of. They gave me permission to continue picking up passengers at the town dock in Hague, which we've done for many years. And my son joined my operation 2 years ago, very part-time. He's actually a chef at Skidmore College, and he was doing this part-time. And with the new regulations, we found a dock for him in the south end. He wants to operate out of the south end. Again, it can be very part-time. That'll be at the Lake Crest Resort. That's pretty much it. We're pretty much going to just continue on as we have for decades, with a variance, of course.
Any commissioners have any questions?
I would just ask Joe, maybe you can comment on the modifications to your boat.
Well, kind of a hard time with.
The modifications to your boat, there were some noise questions, and you agreed to do something?
Interestingly, there were a couple of individuals that indicated to the Town of Hague that my boat was loud. This just came up this year. I've been in business for 26 years. One individual last year brought it to my attention, and in 26 years I had one, written complaint, if you will. A gentleman that lives about a mile up the road from my residence in Hague. And I took note of it, discussed it with my family, and we took the approach, let's kind of a wait-and-see approach to see if there's any other complaints. I didn't think the boat was that loud. It's a Penyan. It's certainly not quiet. It's an inboard. Had no additional complaints. This year, I initially requested a marina permit from the Town of Hague, and in doing so, 2 other individuals, I believe, came forward and indicated that the boat was loud. So once I heard that, we're certainly not trying to upset anyone. I explored a muffler system for the boat, because right now it's a single screw inboard with a straight exhaust, and determined that they make a muffler system for that particular setup. It's about $1,000. installed. So my initial thought a month or two ago was to have the decibel level measured, and if I was, to see if I was within the parameters. But I'm going to take it a step further, and I'm just going to install a system before I put the boat in the water in the spring. I'm being respectful to my neighbors and whatnot. Even if one or two people think it's loud, I'm going to try to tone that down. I just think it's the right thing to do. So we've addressed that, I think.
I think that's great. My grandfather used to make me roll out about a half a mile before he would start the motor.
Well, interestingly, I have a new neighbor who inherited property on the water right next to my dock. And I was great friends with his dad. His dad passed away. He was 94 years old. He passed away 2 years ago. And the son inherited that, and they spend occasional weekends there. And he came down. He didn't really complain about the noise, but he said, gee, you can start your boat up. And so what I do now for him, if I see him there, I have a 9.9 four-stroke. And weather permitting, if we have a 20-knot south wind, I can't back out with my kicker, but most days I can. So I start that up and I back out a few hundred yards, and he's appreciated that. So I mean, you try to be cognizant of the opinions of others, and 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, you try to be as quiet as you can. I was also tossing my dock lines on the dock. I've done it for 26 years. And he said, I hear this loud thud. He said, what's the thud noise we're hearing? I said, gee, I don't know. It was that. So now I place them on the dock, and because I have those bungees on, and that alleviated that problem. So.
He's got better hearing than you and I.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Any other questions? I'd be happy to.
I don't have any. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thanks for having me.
Anyone here, anyone else in the audience want to make comment on this? Sir?
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Peter Kearney. Lucky enough to have been born and raised on Saturday Point, Uncle Place, the best part of the lake, I think. A graduate of Ticonderoga High School, the finest school on the shores of Lake George. Along the way, I got a couple of engineering degrees. Spent a few years with my dad in the building business, building houses in Saturday Point, over in Hewlett's, and building docks and boathouses there. So I spent a lot of time around the lake. Still spend summers there, and my house is about 2/10 of a mile north of Mr. Greco's dock where he burst his boat. That's about 2/10 of a mile as the crows fly, and unfortunately that's about 2/10 of a mile as noise travels. I've provided several letters on the record for you folks to consider. I've referenced some EPA studies that have been done on noise propagation from motorboats to shoreline residences, and my estimates are on the order of 29 decibel increase in noise at my house. About 6:30 every day, my family and my guests are awakened by the noise from that boat. For years and years, I've called Mr. Greco. I've sent emails, and I've called, and I've asked him to do the neighborly thing and install a decent and effective muffler system on that boat. Unfortunately, so far, that has not yet happened. Further, I have increased concerns when I look at the information that is missing from his application, the gaps that exist in his variance request, and the inaccuracies that are embedded in his short environmental assessment form. So those kind of things come together, and I'm concerned that while he may make statements that he's going to retrofit a muffler, I'm not sure about how effective that muffler system will be. So I've looked to Seeker, and I've looked at guidance provided by the New York Department of Environmental Conservation, where they talk about critical environmental areas and how noise should be assessed in critical environmental areas, and where it is incumbent upon lead agencies to mitigate that noise. And I would suggest that if you look at the instructions that are in New York State DEC's policy and guidance, and you look at the specific criteria that they identify, that you need to go beyond the standard noise ordinance that's contained in Lake George Park Commission regulations. DEC would characterize the level of noise that we're accustomed to hearing from Mr. Greco's boat as objectionable to intolerable. Their words, but I think they're well chosen. I would ask that you give very specific consideration to that guidance that is embedded in seeker and in DEC policy, and you be guided in terms of making your final recommendations on what to do with this action. My recommendation to you is in two areas. One, that threshold of incremental noise that should emanate from any kind of a boat at 6:30 in the morning is on the order of 10 decibels. And secondly, you should look at the application, the variance request, and probably put those off in terms of your determination today. There are incomplete answers to the questions that are in there. There's inaccurate information, and the public would like an extended comment period to deal with this issue. There were notice provisions that I would suggest were not met in the procedures followed. I know following all state procedures is not the easiest thing in the world to do, but I was late in terms of being notified that the application had arrived here. I know others who would like to have had more time to put comments together, so I'll ask you to take a look at that guidance and to do the right thing. Thank you for your time.
Can I ask you a question, sir?
Certainly.
Would you be more specific on what you were referring to as inaccuracies? That's a pretty broad statement for a
Oh,
man.
certainly. Short form assessment filled out by Mr. Greco has two critical areas in it that are not correct. One, he does not identify Lake George as a critical environmental area. Your regulations do that, and once it's identified as a critical environmental area, seeker and policy guidance from New York State DEC are very specific in terms of how lead agencies need to assess noise and to mitigate that noise. Secondly, his home as well as mine is, within a quarter mile of a well-known roosting area for endangered bats. DEC won't tell you specifically publicly where it is, but it's commonly known there are thousands of endangered bats that winter out there. There used to be hundreds of thousands of bats. So there are endangered species in his backyard, in my backyard, and Lake George is a critical environmental area with very specific needs in terms of noise mitigation.
I hate to keep quibbling here, but does he actually say in his application that there are no endangered or
Yes.
species nearby?
Correct.
Any further questions?
Thank you.
sir. Anyone else want to make comments? Mr. Greco, you want to say anything in response?
Yeah, just for the record, I believe he indicated, he spoke to me several occasions. I don't remember ever speaking to this gentleman. I do remember approximately 2 years ago receiving an email from him, and I responded that basically I've been in business for 20 plus years and I've had no complaints. So I didn't put a lot of, with all due respect, I didn't put a lot of merit into one complaint. Like I said, most recently with my application regarding a marina permit, I believe 2 other individuals voiced concern about boat noise. And once I heard that, we're taking action without even having any decibel testing on the boat. With regard to the application, I've never totally dealt before. The endangered species question, I'm not sure how I answered that. I may have said no, because I'm not aware of any endangered species. I didn't realize that there was a bat population that was considered endangered. If that is the case, I'm assuming they're up in the mountains behind my house someplace. I don't see where my boat leaving the dock, for a fishing charter is going to have any negative impact upon an endangered bat population, but I'm not a biologist. But as, just to reiterate, I'm going to put a muffler system on the boat voluntarily, and hopefully that'll resolve the noise issue.
Thank you. Mark, do you have any clarification on a special noise regs from DEC?
Well, yeah, the noise policy applies to those areas that have not had a local noise ordinance. Presumption is when you go through the process of a regulation regarding noise that you have encountered and discussed and analyzed all the impacts related to that, to noise, and have established the decibel limit and set that limit. And that, in those cases, the noise policy does not apply. So if there's a decibel limit for Lake George, which I believe there is, the thought process that went into that is in fact what the noise policy would take the place of should it have not been something that was done. With respect to the endangered species, the activity remains the same. There's no change in activity. The activities would not, therefore, be subject to our regulation under Part 182 because A, it is not an activity that has changed. It's grandfathered in, and B, it's not an activity that would affect the bats directly.
Bats aren't in those caves in the summertime.
No, they're usually in trees. They'll be in roost trees and whatever, but, you know, again, there's no change in activity that would affect their behavior.
Any other commissioners have any questions?
In my attic.
Very your attic. More guy.
Regarding the noise, the decibels, so the commission's policy on decibels would apply, and that's ongoing. That regardless of whether we approve this or not, since he's going to be putting a muffler on the boat, it would seem to me that we ought to just double check that he's within the decibel level that's allowed by us during next year. I don't need to make it a part of the resolution, but it seems to me there's enforcement already in place there. Is that correct?
I'm probably usurping staff and legal's in place here, but this decibel thing is in enforcement the year round. Yeah, we have that in place. You could, if you wanted to, put a requirement on the permit that once that Mr. Greco installs a muffler, which he's already offered to do, and I understand maybe in the process of doing it, you could put that on it, and you could also request a testing of it afterwards as a condition of the permit, if you so chose.
I wouldn't be against that.
I think it's going to be complied with by anyway.
It's a condition of the Lake George Park Commission, regardless. It's a regulation. It's a limit, period. So it's redundant in the permit.
Yeah, I think it's redundant to put it in there. Okay.
Question for Joe. Is he within tolerance?
I've never had a complaint. Control's never had a complaint. I would say it's close, but I think it's within limits.
Okay.
With muffler, I think we'll definitely break down.
Right.
We have decibel meters. We do testing. More than one individual test in the spring.
Okay.
You know, it's just like any other vessel, it's got to pass New York State standards.
Right.
But that's a tough test. I mean, I remember, I've never lived near a charter fishing boat, but you know, your kid grew up in the 50s and you hear the rumble of a V8, and it's not an unattractive sound in some instances.
Not at all.
But I've had boats in my neighborhood where I formerly lived, and I know of one specific one that was, in my opinion, the worst violator that I'd ever heard. He accidentally got caught for speeding and had a sound test, and I was disappointed to find out that he passed the sound test. Backing away from the dock, he was, and unless he had a switch that he was cutting out, and I doubt that. I think the boat was.
There are two different tests. You can do a shoreline test or the stationary. We typically do the stationary test unless there's complaints that someone's running up and down shoreline without a boat, and we will do No, that test is
Is it dual or single exhaust on your Penn Am? Is that a dual
I
exhaust?
think,
I'm sorry?
Is that a dual exhaust on your Penn Am?
I can't hear.
I'm sorry.
dual exhaust.
Pardon me?
A dual exhaust or single
It's
exhaust?
a dual exhaust, it's a single screw dual exhaust, and right now there's no muffler system whatsoever on it.
Yeah.
It's just your classic
Straight pipe. like-
Straight pipe.
Yep.
if you will. And it's got an elbow extension on the transom. Trolling and idle, the exhaust is underwater.
Right.
When you're up on plane, that pipe is out of the water, so it's louder. So I agree with the officer, you know, a muffler system's it's the answer, you know. But interestingly, not to sound like a broken record, I've been in business 26 years. We have a stellar reputation. And I'm a retired law enforcement officer myself, 30 years with New York State Parole. You know, I'm very reasonable. We're not looking to upset or offend anyone. On the contrary, you know, if I can do something to appease someone, if I really think it's a problem, we're going to do that. Up until this point, I really haven't thought it was a problem with one email. And that's the only email I've ever received or verbal complaint in 26 years. And, you know, you're not going to make everyone happy when you're in business. But when I received two more, they weren't really even complaints, they were concerns. I would categorize his scenario as a complaint. When I heard the other two concerns, I'm going to take action and install this muffler, okay? That's pretty much it in a nutshell.
thank you, sir.
But I spoke with two inboard dealers, Adirondack Marine, Jeff at Adirondack Marine, and there's a dealer down by exit 17N, and they both said we install these things every day, and they're great. It's like about a $1,000 product, and that should resolve it.
Joe, is our decibel regulation the same no matter what time of day it is?
Yes.
So it's not early morning, it's not lower threshold?
Sir,
If I may. Couple of things. I believe your noise decibel is different for tour boats prior to 8 o'clock in the morning. It's a lower level, number one. Number two, I would suggest if you take a close look at DEC's policy in terms of the instructions to lead agencies in terms of how they are supposed to consider noise and the kind of mitigation that is within your authority to require in this kind of situation, you'll see that there are very specific instructions and very specific criteria. And I'd suggest that your current noise levels for midday are much higher than the kind of levels that you would come up with should you, make a specific set of instructions in this case. Lastly, I think the town of Hague's guidance to you most recently was that Joe's continued use of the steamboat dock is conditioned upon satisfactory muffler system being installed. They don't quantify that. And once again, I'm suggesting if you're going to put a muffler system on, require that muffler system to do the neighborly thing, to do the right thing, and if you follow DEC's policy, is something on the order of 10 decibels above background. Those kind of mufflers are available. They don't cost any more than any other muffler. There are 6 sets of comments before you from individuals and from the town that all raise noise issues. Something needs to be done in this case, and that's why I've taken the time to come here and ask that you do that. So thank you.
thank you, sir. In response to your first point, the reason we're having this now almost 16-minute discussion is because we are investigating the noise issue. We're not ignoring investigating. Well, you said we should we should be investigating it and exhibiting more diligence. And I would say this discussion is doing just exactly that.
Sorry.
Okay.
The only thing we can enforce are, Bruce, the only thing we can enforce are Park Commission regulations.
That's true. We don't enforce DEC regulations. We do. No offense, Mr.
That's guidance document.
Yeah. That is guidance, and I just wanted to mention that. And we are considering whether or not to make it a condition of the permit that it installs a muffler. And as far as I can see, Mr. Greco has already moved in that direction. Any further comments from anybody in the audience? Any further comments?
Yeah, I just have a question. Was it proposed, and this is the staff, was it proposed in the application where the materials indicate that a muffler will be installed? And is that part of what you consider to be your review and determination of significance?
Yeah, he did, in withdrawing his application to the town, provided some correspondence to the town that mentioned he'd be installing a muffler. He provided that letter to us to supplement our application. So I agree with that, and I think your intent was to make that part of the record and part of the application that a muffler would be installed.
So in other words, and your determination of significance, obviously, that was consideration in there. So therefore, it appears that if we approve this in accordance with his application, we are in effect approving his application or intent to install the muffler as well. So I would consider that complete.
I don't think, but I'm going to ask Mr. Greco, do you have any objections since you made the application to us modifying your application to install a muffler?
Can't hear you.
Installing a muffler.
Installing a muffler?
No, not at all.
I didn't think so.
Yeah, no,
Put it in the app.
But it's in the
It's in the application, so
Okay.
that's what we're trying to make. It's
Yeah, I just-
it's
Before the
what
vote is launched.
Matter of record.
In the spring. I'm back the last week of April to run a charter operation in Florida all winter. And when I come back in April, it's going to be installed. I usually launch my boat May 1st, and that system will be on before I launch it.
Okay.
And it'll be the best system I can buy. I'm not going to, put a $150 muffler on that thing. I want it to be effective. That's why I'm doing it voluntarily.
Thank you. Any further comments? Joe? We ready for the resolution? Unless any more discussion, okay.
Resolution 2017-66, application number 5226-34-17 SPT. Applicant is Joe Greco, Justy Joe Fishing Charter. Whereas the applicant has applied for a permit for tour board operation, the Lake George Park Commission has reviewed the application, supporting documents, comments received, and other information which appears in the record. Whereas the commission has made a determination that the project is an unlisted action pursuant to State Environmental Quality Review Act 6 NY-CRR 617.5, and as a lead agency for the purposes of the State Environmental Quality Review Act, has made a determination that the project will have no significant impact on the environment. And whereas the action is considered to be a major project pursuant to 6 NY-CRR 645-5.3, public notice has been published and distributed as required. The applicant has demonstrated that the facility complies with the tour boat requirements of 646-14.4D, except as noted below. Whereas the applicant has requested a variance from 6 NY-CRR 646-1.4D to B. Tour boats shall be operated from properly permitted marina facilities. Whereas the applicant has demonstrated that strict conformance with the regulation will cause unnecessary hardship due to unique and peculiar circumstances which impose substantial financial and technical or safety burdens. Whereas the commission finds that there is no reasonable possibility that the applicant's business will bring a reasonable return following conformance with the regulation. And whereas the commission finds that the project will have no adverse impact on the health, safety, or welfare of the public, the environment, or the resources of the park, and will not alter the essential character of the area in which it is proposed, and will not lead to congestion in the park. Now therefore it be resolved that the Lake George Park Commission hereby resolves to approve the above application provided no substantial.
That's, that last one's, this was a copy and paste job, so actually that last one's from last month. So it's resolved to approve the above application as proposed.
As proposed.
Sorry about that.
Okay. So moved.
Second?
It's been moved and seconded. The only question I have, and I've asked council and I'll ask staff, where in any place in the application, because you mentioned he's already agreed, I know he agreed in conversation, where in his application does it say he agreed to install a muffler?
Page 37 of the record is a letter to the Hague Planning Board that Mr. Greco provided to us, where he states, and I quote, "We also plan to have a muffler system installed on our boat."
Excellent. That's on the record. Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Basically, your request that we, in your letter, that we added something was already admitted to him in his by him in his application. Next project is a Class A Marina application submitted by Mr. Holliday. That doesn't need an awful lot of introduction. I think everybody here is familiar with that, but does staff want to say anything further on this?
So just a little brief history. This was before the commission in May 2017 for a new Class A marina offering indoor boat storage and the construction of a boat storage building for 5 boats. The commission, in review, found that the application at that time was not compliant with the Class A marina requirements and indicated its intent to deny the application. Our regulations allow an applicant to request a hearing to more fully flush out the record in an application. In this case, the applicant did so. In August, we had a adjudicatory hearing with an administrative law judge, compliments of DEC, to review the written record and what was reviewed by the commission and the points made by the applicant. In this case, the administrative law judge, in her review and consideration, concluded the application met the criteria for a Class A marina permit. That was her recommendation. The final decision on the application is always referred back to the commission, and so that is what we're doing here at this meeting, is again reviewing those application materials and the hearing record to see if it meets the requirements for Class A marina. The applicant is represented by Mr. Lasowitz, who's with us today.
Thank you. Someone to speak for the applicant.
Thank you. Tommy Lasowitz, I'm the attorney for Mr. Halliday. I'm disappointed that we only had 6 members here today, and I think it's in the best interest of my client to wait and put it off until next month in the hopes that we will have more than just 6 members in attendance.
I understand that, and I mentioned that earlier. You, however, are allowed to make any statements that you want in case you have any questions.
I don't have any questions, and I'll reserve any statements I make. I'll be honest with you, Mr. Chairman, it's my understanding that anyone who participated in an adjudicatory proceeding, the record's closed and no one is entitled to talk. We all had our opportunity at that hearing.
Yes, however, the hearing is over, but now we're rehearing your application.
Okay, I'll reserve any.
I mean, I can remember what was said, but I want to understand that. And for I'd like to say something so that you understand where we're coming from. And any commissioner or staff can correct me. Our 2 main objections when we issued an intent, or told you that we were had an intent to deny, were 1, that the order on consent had not been complied with, and 2, that there was doubt among the commission members as to whether or not this was actually going to be a marina. I can say, and I think it's pretty obvious, that the order on consent has been complied with. That was notified to me by the Post-Star. But and that portion of it has been satisfied. The other portion, as to whether or not you're going to operate a marina, you said in your application you were going to operate a marina, and this is for my own clarification. I understand, and you correct me if I'm understanding wrong, that your justification to the town of Queensbury for this building site was that it was going to be a marina. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, it's correct. And they approved it under the assumption that it was going to be a marina.
Correct.
Okay. And right now, it appears that you have answered all of the requirements for a marina, as far as I can say. That's only what I have. I'm saying it right now before we actually, because based on what you said before and what's in the record, you have satisfied the requirements for marina. I personally, and not personally, as a representative of the Park Commission, believe that the onus or the responsibility for determining whether or not you are actually going to operate a marina rests more appropriately on the town of Queensbury, since they granted their permit based on whether or not you were going to operate a marina. If you don't operate a marina in the future, I would say if you are given this permit, that, and I know my counsel is listening very carefully to what I say, that if you are given this permit, if we grant this permit, whether it's today or a month from today, that the responsibility for determining whether or not you are operating a marina should properly fall upon the town of Queensbury, since that was the basis for their permit. However, I want to remind you that in the application for this building permit and the marina permit, you stated you're going to operate a permit. It is implied in our law that should you not comply with anything that you've implied in your application, then we have a right to review it and could possibly revise it.
It's understood.
You understood? Okay.
It's understood. And
that's all I have to say.
On the hearing record itself, we also offered to provide the commission with copies of the leases each year to substantiate that there are boats being placed in that building under lease.
That's very generous, because we do not require that of other marinas.
I understand that.
Yes.
But I knew that was an issue the last time we discussed it.
Right, yeah. It occurred to me that, well, maybe we should make sure you do it, but I said, no, we don't do that to anybody else, so we're not going to do it to you. Yes.
You're making council smile. Just,
I'm sorry?
I said you're making council smile, just saying.
It doesn't happen often.
Well, I don't know which council. I'm not there. You look at her. Well, the law is the law.
Bruce, can I ask if the commissioners have any other concerns that we could make?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at. And that's
I don't have any concerns. I believe they satisfied all of my concerns, as you mentioned in your brief statement.
Yeah, and that's the reason for me going through this, sir, is to bring to your attention prior to, if you want to delay until next month, any concerns that we might have, so you can answer them. And as I don't at this point have any concerns, and neither does.
I don't think anybody has any concerns.
I don't want to poll the commissioners and ask them how they're going to vote, but if you choose to wait till next month, that's certainly your privilege.
That won't make a picture.
This is sweet.
We'll withdraw our objection, putting this off until December, and we'll ask for a vote today.
Thank you, sir. Then I'll ask if there are other comments from the audience concerning this application. Ma'am?
I think it's still morning, so good morning. My name is Isabel Munoff. I live at 2626 Ridge Road, Queensbury, right across the road from Mr. Halliday's project. Just want to start by saying Happy Thanksgiving. I know it's been a long road. I just have a few things that I would like to say in summary. I'm not going to go through everything. You guys have heard it a million times, but here goes. I can see this project from my home. Despite what anybody else says, I can. It's already having an impact, noise-wise, visually, and environmentally. And it will continue to have an impact. But who am I? I only live in direct line of impact forever. This should not have gone this far. The reason it has is because the town of Queensbury's town planning board is dysfunctional in that it approves and disapproves based on the word of one person. The zoning board of appeals fails because it defers to the word of one person. There are no checks and balances. This means one person is entrusted to be gatekeeper to the yays or nays on projects, uses gray area and his power on these boards to push through projects which should have been subjected to scrutiny. Regulations are protections for all of us. Unfortunately, we live in a time where regulations are looked at as nuisances and unnecessary. We live in a time when money can ramrod any regulation. Truth is ridiculed, shared benefit is denigrated, individual benefit is elevated. This commission has been unfortunately subjected to ruling on a project that should never have gotten this far. You were given a project that received approval based on loopholes and smoke and mirrors. Further decisions, judges, adjudicators, whatever you call them, they're all based on false foundation. I can see this project from my home. I can. Despite what anybody else says, I live there. I can see it. I hear it. I see it. It has an impact. I see the mounds of fill that are going in over there. I see all the trees that have been ripped down. I hear it. I hear beeping noises, trucks backing up. I can see it. It has an impact. But who am I? I only live in a direct line of impact forever. This should not have gotten this far. And no, you shouldn't have to do the work of the agencies that were entrusted to do their job before it got this far. This dysfunctional process, loopholes, gray areas, winks and nods, this will continue to happen if you let it. Thank you.
Anyone else have any comments?
Good morning. Frank Munoz, live right across the street. This is not about the Hatfields and McCoys as the main issue. The main issue here is the lake. If I get off track, please, Mr. Chairman, tell me. Graduated from college, first summer job, 1964 in Lake George. I've never left. Lake George is the foundation of, that's why we're all here. The lake is a precious entity. Had the privilege of living in Lake George Village for close to 30 years. Owned a tavern, owned a restaurant. The lake has always been the focal point of my life. Fortunate enough to end up in Cloverdale, where I live now, right across from Mr. Halliday. And I don't like my integrity being questioned. By my integrity, I mean the fact that I can look directly at this. In 2010, Mr. Halliday testified in front of the, appeared before the Queensbury Planning Board when the Castaway Marina were going to do some more boat storage across the street near his house. And Mr. Halliday said, I don't have a real big problem with it, but I would like you to ask, I'd like the owners to do this. I'd like you to shrink wrap in white. You can go back and look at the minutes. Because the people up on the Pilot Knob Road can see it. And also, the Munoffs across the way look directly down upon it. Now, that's even further than Halliday's. So I don't like my integrity being questioned. Yes, I look directly at this, at his backyard. My driveway is 5 feet higher than the top of this monstrous building that's going to be going up. Mr. Halliday also appeared before the Queensbury Planning Board in 2013, and I quote, "I've been a neighbor who has lived on Ridge Road for the past 34 years and has worked every year to improve the look of my home and neighborhood," and he emphasized that he wanted to remain residential. He also stated that there's no need for any additional boat storage facility. We are a residential neighborhood. He expressed his concerns regarding the character of the neighborhood changing, the property values, and he was extremely happy with the neighborhood the way it was. That was in 2013. Here we are now. Mr. Halliday wants this for his own personal benefit. Why is only 1,000 square foot of this building listed for boat storage? If 1,000 square foot is needed for his boat storage, why doesn't he have 1,100 square foot garage like everyone else? At the last meeting we talked in May, we listed as the word subterfuge was used. That's exactly what this is. It's been smoke and mirrors. All of the ordinances in the town of Queensbury, and I'm not going to bore you with them, none of them were followed. You can't have 4 principal buildings on 1.6 acres of land. The application itself is not truthful. With all of the meetings that I've been to, I have never heard anyone well, Mr. Halliday doesn't come because all I hear is, yes, I believe so. I think so, and as far as I know, and yeah, I think that's right. No one's ever said, how many residents do you have, Mr. Halliday? On the application, it's not truthful. And I know it's not a big deal that he puts 2, and then and another one he put 1, and then when he got caught, they moved it to multifamily. I know that's not a big deal, gentlemen, but why lie on an application? Why lie on the number of kitchens, the number of bathrooms? Why? To make the application look better. So before you, I'm telling you that this application is misrepresented. Even the setbacks are left blank. And Mr. Chairman, you did say something, and I don't know legally what the ramifications are. I did my research. Queensbury has never granted a permission for a marina. I went through the whole thing. The planning board granted him permission for a boat storage facility, and that's in writing, and it's in the minutes. There was no marina. Some little guy with a mustache across the street, 3 months later, found the law and brought it to the zoning administrator. With a special use permit, you must have 2 acres of land to have a boat storage facility. Nowhere in the town records of Queensbury has he fulfilled the requirements for an application for a Class A marina. It just became, it's like somebody coming from Italy with an O at the end of the name and it got changed and nobody knows how. There is no application for a marina in Queensbury approved. Lastly, what you're going to make a decision on today, gentlemen, I think is going to be one of the most important decisions affecting the Lake George Basin that has been made in a long, long time. I've asked this question to the Queensbury zoning administrator, and I apologize for keep throwing Queensbury under the bus, but they do deserve that right now. If this is allowed to happen, are you telling me, and I'm not talking to you, gentlemen, I'm talking to them, are you telling me that anyone that lives in a waterfront residential district in the town of Queensbury can receive a special use permit? And the answer was yes. It's very easy to get a special use permit. There really isn't a lot to it. So, okay? Anyone that has a special use permit can build a structure of any kind and call it a marina on any size piece of land with absolutely no density requirements. And he said, as long as they meet the setbacks. So I said, let's take the three peninsulas around where I live, Cloverdale, Rockhurst, Assembly Point. Are you saying that and you don't even have to be on the lake, I'm not on the lake and I'm residential. Every house on that lake, if they wanted to, gets a special use permit, they can build a structure of any size with a special use permit, as long as it's labeled a marina. And then they can meet the setbacks. They can do it in their driveway if they meet the setback. He says, under the law, the way it is today, that is correct. So you're going to set a precedent can be set here today. And I'm telling you, this is about the lake. Do I have a personal thing in it? Yeah, but you know what? I've got almost 6 acres. I can't go to my rabbits and my deer on the other side of my house. This is going to affect my land value. It is going to affect the way we live residentially. We can already see what has happened across the street. 20 years ago, they tried to build a house. That pond is still there. And a lot hasn't been talked about, the environmental factors here. There are bordering wetlands. And I know that the approval was all in his application, and environmentally everything is okay. I don't buy that, to be honest with you. I don't think the lake, I don't know if you got a letter from the Lake George Fund, the fund. I know that they're concerned. And I hope the Lake George Association is concerned, because this is going to be an environmental disaster. There's nobody there. There's no employees. I heard the whole thing about now he has a bathroom. Well, I know a lot of people that have docks and had to, Class A marina, you got to satisfy certain things. But before I leave here today, the one thing that I would like is to have somebody actually tell this board, how many residences do you have? How many bathrooms do you have? How many kitchens do you have? Just be truthful. That's about all I got to say. But you remember, this, like my wife said, this never should have been in your hands. Every ordinance in the town of Queensbury, and I checked with the Adirondack Park on every single one of them, and I asked, is each dwelling considered a principal building? Yes. The fact that they have 3 residents, do they have 3 principal buildings? Yes. Can your principal building be bigger than your residence? Or can your accessory building be bigger than your residence? No. And it goes on and on and on. The last May, this is a beauty. Last May, one of the representatives of Mr. Halliday, because Mr. Halliday's never here, that way I guess he can avoid all this. The question was asked, sir, do you have a plan B for this 3,600 square foot building? And the answer was no. Well, I did a FOIL request because after that meeting, I came home and the next day there were carpenters, trucks, they're going full scale. I called the town of Queensbury, said, how can this be? Didn't get any answer back. Finally, I did a FOIL request and found out that back in April, way before this meeting in May, he had made an application and he had called it an accessory building. And he had an application for an accessory building. It was probably called in because it was never signed by the applicant. And I took that to Queensbury and they said, well, it must have been a mistake. So he did have a plan B. And as I'm here now, if I hadn't got that construction stopped, the building would be up now. All the footings, all the construction for the footings are there, and they're just ready to go. And I have what I'm saying is, there's just so much dishonesty and integrity that wasn't followed here. And yes, I know I'm probably going to be looking at this building, but you know what? I'm not going to lose my integrity over it, and he has lost his integrity as far as I'm concerned as a neighbor. That's all I got.
Thank you. Anyone else here have a comment?
Morning. Jason Halliday from House Sun. First, I want to say I'm a little bit confused. I've never heard it brought up that there is a 10,000 square foot building being constructed as we speak right next door to us, which is also within direct sight of their perch up on the knoll. Our original intention or use with this building has changed due to financial burden that has been put upon us from the prior site. We do plan on operating a boat storage facility. We have been scrutinized, and we have met compliance, including from the APA regarding the wetlands. There are no wetlands. Judge McBride has clearly laid that out in her findings. Are there any questions that any of you have for me while I'm here?
No. Not at the moment, no.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments? Jim? Go ahead, you were up first. John, your hand was a second later, but I'll get you next.
Nicole Gillis, 2428 Ridge Road. I did like to add that Mr. Thompson's earlier presentation was a fantastic show of how much time, money, and effort goes in to protecting the lake and how delicate it is. And now here we speak about this application. I find it ironic. I would like to start today by stating all of the uses and titles that this spoke about building has had since its original start in 2014. It began as a toy storage facility, as heard on the Fordan audio. It was then titled as Halliday Farm, as seen on the Halliday's road sign. Then it was proposed to the Town of Queensbury Planning Board in January of 2017 as a boat storage facility. After the Town of Queensbury was questioned about their own codes in regards to a boat storage facility not being legal in Water Residential Zoning District in the Town of Queensbury on less than 2 acres of land, the building was born again with a new title, a Class A Marina. As Mr. Halliday awaited the Lake George Park Commission decision in May, he adopted another title as an accessory use building when he went in for an accessory building permit through the Town of Queensbury, which was granted even with no signature from Mr. Halliday in April of 2017. How many more names are we going to give this building until we call it for what it is, what it originally reared its ugly head as, and that was a building to store Mr. Halliday's toys. In regard to Judge McBride's determination that there is no environmental impact, just a quick point that Mr. Novinsky, Lake George Waterkeeper, stated at the last meeting, even though the stormwater plan was signed off on, he still questioned how it would function correctly right next to wetlands. Even Mr. Novinsky felt Mr. Halliday and his attorney worked a loophole by calling this a marina when truly it is just being put up for storage. Judge McBride stated numerous times, as did Mr. Halliday on his applications, he does not have any intention to carry out any type of sales or service, but only to store boats. The special use permit granted in January of 2017 by the Queensbury Planning Board was and is still for a boat storage facility. This permit was granted while the Planning Board stood back and overlooked at least 2 of their own codes that are not only under the town, but are supposed to be upheld and implemented by the APA. However, when questioned, the APA strongly advised that they would not uphold these codes because it was now in the town of, it was now in the hands of the town of Queensbury. It has already been discussed at previous meetings as to what happened when Queensbury was challenged on their unlawful decisions that have been pushed through on this project. I would like to also remind the Commission that many of the Zoning Board of Appeal members could not wait to pass this project over to you like a hot potato because they knew it was wrong. In summary, to this point, the special use permit supports a boat storage facility, not a Class A marina. I believe Mr. Halliday had stated that there was no wetlands. However, I did read within Judge McBride's report that he has filled 2,350 square feet of wetlands for this project. So I just wanted to make note of that. My next point, Mr. Halliday has misrepresented information on many of his submitted applications. And through FOIL requests, I have uncovered he has been dishonest about many things, such as the number of dwellings within his home, the number of bathrooms, and the number of kitchens. His lot size has changed from 1.6 to 1.4 to 1.62. Setbacks, as Mr. Munoz had mentioned as well, have been left blank on his application, and as well as the documentation of only 1,000 square feet being used to store 5 boats. These may not sound like impactable issues, but if so, then why lie? The answer is simple. These components do hold ground, as Mr. Halliday knows that each of these dwellings would be considered a principal building. He knows that those few additional bathrooms and that extra kitchen he left off would impact the bigger picture of this application. And he is able to store his own personal boat in that 1,000 square feet, leaving the other 2,600 wide open to store his toys. Judge McBride took into account, according to the report, that a Mr. Joel Jordan in Hague, New York, has a private single-family home and was issued a Class A marina permit by the Lake George Park Commission. I'm not sure if the commission is prepared to speak on this, but I question how this is comparable. Mr. Jordan has a single-family home. Mr. Halliday has a 3-unit dwelling. The hearing report did not include how much land Mr. Jordan has. I'm not sure if the commission may know. Mr. Halliday, on any given day, as I already spoke about, depending on which suited his needs, has anywhere from 1.4 to 1.62 acres. Mr. Halliday's property technically is already 300% overdeveloped before adding this 3,600 square foot structure. So my next question would be, what would classify this to be considered an issue with overcrowding? Judge McBride deemed that overcrowding was not an issue when she made her determination. So I'm curious, as I mentioned, what would be considered an issue with overcrowding when Mr. Halliday's parcel is already and seems to surely be on its way to further overdevelopment and congestion? Also, was Mr. Jordan's Class A marina structure larger than his principal building? Was it surrounded by wetlands that were being filled to erect and to accommodate his stormwater plan? I have also made note that a big difference between these two projects is Mr. Jordan actually makes a living in the boating industry by not running only storage outside, but service out of the building that was approved. Mr. Halliday is a project manager and has never once had a thing to do with the boating industry, with the exception of delivering marine parts. The comparable sounds good in a report, but how much of the relevant and pertinent information that would be allowing for these two projects to be analytically compared has been left out. Another point that was made in the report that spoke about 13 commercial use businesses nearby Mr. Halliday's residence. I feel again we're comparing apples and oranges. These businesses have the appropriate amount of land to accommodate their facilities. They are on commercial property and they have been established anywhere from 20 to 40 years. Mr. Halliday has stated that he is erecting this structure to accommodate the growing needs for boat storage. That was his words on one of the applications. That is laughable since Castaways, Michael's Marina, and other nearby marinas provide sufficient storage. Mr. Halliday's space is not going to impact the Lake George boating community and support any needs for storage when there are no outstanding needs to begin with. Another manipulation factor. The report also states the applicant has demonstrated that he intends to use the proposed structure as a Class A marina. I believe it was spoke about, but my question was, I must ask, when Mr. Halliday does not comply of using this building as such, who would be enforcing that? And I believe you had spoke on that, and I was having trouble hearing in the beginning. Were you saying that Queensberry would handle that enforcement if needed, or would it be the commission?
I didn't say that. I said the building permit is properly issued by the town.
Okay.
We are issuing, if we issue a marina permit, that if any proviso or any provision of his application is not, it doesn't turn out to be true, then we have the right to go back and look at it to revoke. No, we don't need the town of Queensberry to revoke any marina permit.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. The report also states the applicant, as I mentioned, demonstrated he intends to use this as a Class A marina. Based on the facts that have been presented at previous meetings, as well as my points today, it is clear that Mr. Halliday will most likely be using this for his own personal storage. Because of one of the components that the judge based her conclusion on, Mr. Halliday's ability to demonstrate he would be using this structure as a Class A marina for the purpose, I would look to the Commission to consider all of the facts that prove otherwise. He has demonstrated time and time again that his only intention, regardless of the temporary mask he has placed on this building, is that he's looking to store his own personal items. You, the Commission, have been the only agency and municipality involved that has followed the moral and ethical standards that our representatives have taken oath to uphold. So thank you. You, the Commission, have been put into a position to follow a path of integrity. I will say, if the Commission makes a choice to go against their own ruling that they so strongly made in May, I feel that anyone and everyone could do what they wish, regardless of the repercussions on the LG waters, and regardless of how many lies and strong immoralities it may display, as long as you lawyer up, find the loopholes, and know the right people. I personally won't be impacted as a neighbor regardless of the outcome today. However, it is the integrity of the Commission and the purpose of protecting the lake that I strive to defend. Why not push this back to the town of Queensberry and allow Mr. Halliday to go through the proper measures of trying to obtain a variance to put up the building so he can utilize it for what its true intentions are and store his personal belongings? And one last point I leave today for the Commission to consider. If Mr. Halliday felt he was able to erect this building in his backyard from the start, why wouldn't he have taken this as his initial approach and saved himself thousands of dollars? Thank you.
Anyone else? John, you wanted to make a comment.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is John Salvador. As you know, I'm a resident in North Queensberry and operate an existing marina on Dunham Bay. I wasn't sure what the format would be this morning, and so if I appear to be somewhat unprepared, you will excuse me. I attended the adjudicatory hearing, and I observed that the six commissioners that will vote on this application today were not present at that meeting, at that hearing. I don't know if you've had a chance to read the record, but in any case, I'd like to read from my comments at that meeting. The adjudicatory hearing was convened at the request of the applicant, Halliday Capital LLC, because the Commission has refused to approve the applicant's application for a permit to operate a so-called Class A marina. The grounds for said refusal are said to be that the applicant has not furnished all necessary to comply with the requirements of a Class A marina, as the same is defined in the Commission's regulations, promulgated June 3rd, 1988. Parallel to the Commission's review and approval of the subject application, this project was reviewed by the Planning Board of the Town of Queensberry, as the applicant's project is required to comply with local zoning. Because the project site is located in one of the town's APA-approved waterfront residential zoning districts, the town has classified the project as that of a commercial boat storage. Not a marina, not a Class A marina, not an existing marina, not a Class B marina, but a commercial boat storage. As was mentioned earlier, the town of Queensberry no longer regulates waterfront facilities, or I should say facilities on the navigable waterways. You know who took 15 years to get them off the lake. And so they changed their regulations a few years ago, whereby they still regulate land uses, including commercial boat storage. That's why that's in there. The applicant has proposed a 3,600 square foot building to store boats where no boat services or sales are intended to occur. Commercial boat storage is an allowable land use in the town's residential zoning district, providing a special use permit is granted by the planning board. In order to obtain a special use permit, you've got to have a site plan approval. So both of those were approved by the planning board. Special use permit 1, 2017 was approved on January 20th of this year. Queensberry's allowed land use of commercial boat storage in a residential zone is somewhat in harmony with that of the often forgotten authority vested in the Department of Environmental Conservation to promulgate the Commission's predecessor regulations called the Lake George Recreation Zone Regulations. Those were promulgated July 3rd, 1981. Therein, a marina within the bounds of the Lake George Recreation Zone was defined by the DEC as any waterfront facility providing accommodations as well as sale and/or services for vessels of any type. Waterfront facility. Between July 3rd, 1981, the effective date of the DEC's Part 646, and May 12th, 1988, the date of the Commission's unauthorized repeal of 6 NYC-RR Part 646, it was commonly accepted and understood that a commercial undertaking dealing with vessels of any type was not a marina unless it was a waterfront facility. Illogical, no? However, the Commission, in an effort to cast an ever greater marina regulatory net after the passage of Chapter 617 of the Laws of '87, instituted the term Class A Marina. There's no legislative grant of authority for the Commission to establish that term and that definition, thus enveloping all commercial activity relating to accommodations, the sale and/or service of vessels, not only of those commercial facilities providing accommodations for vessels in a waterfront facility, but now even those commercial entities providing accommodations and services for vessels using the waters of Lake George. In this regard, the Commission has trampled on the affairs of the town of Queensberry and all other jurisdictions having land use zoning powers in violation of Article 9 of the state constitution. The Commission has no authority to require the applicant to obtain a Class A marina permit because the applicant's commercial boat storage is not on the waters of Lake George. In this regard, the DEC, when they promulgated the first Part 646 regulations in 1981, preempted this organization's definition of a marina. The DEC, a state agency, has preempted the Park Commission. That can be found to be legal in what we call the preemption doctrine, and your attorney can make that available to you. Subsequent to that hearing, I read in the Post-Star that the law judge backs the plan. Post-Star for November 15th. In that article, there's a statement here, looks like it's being reported by someone from the commission. Technically, the commission does not have jurisdiction on Halliday's backyard, which does not overlook the lake. What difference does whether or not it overlooks the lake make? I can't find that any place in the regulations, okay? But I'm very interested in this understanding, unless this is fake news, that the commission has no jurisdiction in his backyard. What's so special about his backyard that you don't have jurisdiction? It is in the Lake George Park. In any case, I believe that he's about to undertake commercial boat